dance around and let the Spirit take control. Get out of your pain and take a different point of view. Get out, tell the world.
Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. A Glimpse of the Kingdom can remain free because of generous donors like you. If you'd like to donate, feel free to do so online, or you can send payments through Facebook Messenger. Don't forget to tell your friends about it so that they can enjoy this ministry as well. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any podcasts.
You can listen to my daddy every single day, like in the gym, in the car, or just at home. Glimpse of the Kingdom is awesome!
Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I am David Pendergrass. I'm a special guest here today, the one and only, internationally known on the microphone.
Yes. Hayden Pendergrass.
The one and only. Penny the King Jr.
Yes.
Not all over the world. Your friends think you're Penny the King, but...
Yep. Everywhere I go.
That's Daddy. The other night, we were watching the evening news, and my son caught a glimpse of it, and it was showing a video clip of Jesse Duplantis.
Good old Jesse.
New Orleans, Louisiana, Pentecostal, charismatic guy. If you know who he is, you know exactly who he is. If you don't know, then okay. Well, turn on TBN or anything like that, you'll see him preaching. He's been around for a long time. Multi-millionaire. He's in getting people's cash and maybe encouraging a lot of people. I don't know, but I've only heard some of his stuff before, some of his sermons, and I could talk about that a little bit perhaps. He got in a lot of trouble lately, a lot of scandal, you might say, controversy, because he only was asking people to believe in God for a $54 million new jet. In fact, the scandal was so bad recently, he came out and responded to it because the backlash was so bad. I just saw on CNN that at the time of this recording was just a few days ago. He mentioned how he is not asking his people to pay for a $54 million jet that Jesus told him he's supposed to believe him for, but he's asking his followers or whatnot to believe for him, believe in God for him, because Jesus told him that he wants them to believe him for it. And so he's asking his people to believe him for it. And that's it. So anyway, my son was listening to that and thought he wanted to do a podcast.
Yeah. I just thought it was so silly to me that $54 million for something that like one person's going to use. I mean, just take the normal plane and on the same CNN thing we were watching, it showed a previous clip of how he was talking about he can't take normal planes because filled with demons and sin and all that. Yeah, you can't
take a normal plane because there's so many demons on it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And how that just seems so absurd to me is that Jesus, he's saying, well, I have to have my jet separated from all those sinners, all those bad people, because I'm not a sinner. I'm a good guy, and I can't be seen with demons. You know what Jesus did? He sat with them. He ate dinner with sinners. He ate dinners with prostitutes. He ate dinners with hundreds of different people that were like the epitome of a non-Christian. I mean, this is silly stuff. Why in the world would you be asking for a jet when you already have three? He has 3 jets that he can't take, and he said that his newest jet that he bought, I think a few years ago, it was 6 or 7.
Well, they bought him, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He said he couldn't use it because he couldn't make it to different parts of the world in one flight. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, layover. Well, I don't know if Jesus talked to hundreds of people, but he did talk to a lot of people. You're right. He welcomed a lot of people and had meals with them. Yeah, it's a bummer. I mean, you know that layover, that'll really kill a person.
I know.
You're have to. Sorry, that's quite bad. I know Hayden gets worked up, and you know something that's several things striking. Of course, I agree with you, son. It's as we've talked about, it's a bit absurd. What I'm also interested in is talking about the theology behind it, the view of God behind it, the view of Christianity behind it, because he is doing exactly what he should be doing when he holds to the views that he has, to the beliefs that he has. So in his worldview, you might say, in his understanding of Christianity, what he's asking is completely normal. And whether it be jets or islands or stick of gum, he is part of what's called the Word of Faith movement. It's been around for quite some time. It's a smaller branch of Pentecostalism. And the idea and what it's taught is that if you just believe something, God will give it to you. And I've heard many sermons on this, many sermons. Now, not all the preachers who preach this aren't identical. but it is a common theme used amongst all kinds of people who are on TV, like Joel Osteen, T.D. Jakes, him, Jesse Duplantis, and many others. Now, they don't all have the same view, but on this one, they're very similar. And you'll know they have this view that if you just believe it, God will give it to you, because they'll say things like, I agree with you and believe it with me. Just like Jesse said, I'm asking my followers or my people, my listeners, to believe it for me. And the idea is that if you have the spoken word and that belief inside of you, that he's going to give it. Now, I've heard sermons where they will go through certain texts, and I don't want to right now, but they have certain Bible verses they will read that for them is evidence that they're holding right theology. So the worst case scenario is they're deliberately being malicious. They're lying. On the bright side, hopefully, it just means they don't know how to read their Bible well. And by that I mean they don't know what historical context is, and literary context, and so forth. But the short of the story is the idea that Christianity, at its core, when it comes to living out the Christian faith, is that if I just believe something, it will occur, is simply false. That's just nonsense. Yep. It is true that we ought to have faith, but the idea that I can just believe I grow wings, I believe that I'm a unicorn, I can believe, well, that's silly. And if someone believes that, then I would say they have no idea what the teaching of Jesus was about. The second thing is, they might say, no, David, we believe things only if the Spirit has told us to believe it, then we're supposed to believe it. To that I'd say, well, that's possibly true. If you really think the Holy Spirit has told you something, and you really think that, you ought to, all right, well, believe him. Then the question is, did the Holy Spirit really tell you something? It became so bad and so common in the early church for people to abuse that privilege of being a prophet or prophetess that Paul says to the Thessalonians, and this is probably the very first Christian document ever, well, it's the first one we ever have, the document of 1 Thessalonians. By that time period, this is within a couple of decades of the death and resurrection of Jesus, that church, way over in Thessaloniki, which is in Greece, so this is a far way away from Israel, within a couple of decades, maybe, I don't know, maybe 1,000 miles away, I guess, maybe something like that, maybe more like 500, 600 miles away, they were already desisting, that is, stopping having prophetic utterances in the church, because they were so tired of being duped, apparently. So Paul even says, don't squelch or stop the spirits, but instead test them. So in the earliest primitive church, they also had a problem with people saying, God told me so. And they got so tired and fed up, they're like, sick, I don't want to hear anymore.
It just seems like some sort of like, it's just a way to get anything they want. Just be, God told me.
Maybe. In the ancient world, we don't know exactly all the time what their motivations were, but it makes you wonder if that's exactly what it is. And that's for sure. And so today, if someone says, well, God told me I'm supposed to believe, okay, but the way we test it is, in the New Testament, I'm not going through a long study right now, but you test it by always, this is why it's so important, son and listener, to test what we think God is telling us by the teaching of Jesus. And I love the image I often picture of a big anchor, like a huge cruise ship would use, a gargantuan anchor like the size of this room that goes down and plops down, and the currents of the water can move the boat around, but it ain't going anywhere in general. I mean, it just barely moves. It can't go that far because the anchor just catches in the dirt and it's not going to go anywhere. Well, interpreting the teaching of Jesus and the New Testament well is that anchor. So no matter what experience we have, we go, does this sound like something Jesus would teach and would say to us now? Then now that's not always black and white. I grant that. It's not always clear, but it sure rules out a lot of nonsense. And it just does. It rolls out false theology and so forth. So then the question is it conceivable that Jesse Duplantis heard Jesus say, I want you to believe me for this new jet? Sure, it's conceivable. It just, if I compare that to what I'm saying now, use the anchor, if I compare that and contrast to the teaching of Jesus, it doesn't seem like something Jesus would say, not because Jesus doesn't like jets. I think Jesse...
They didn't even have jets at the time, so they wouldn't understand.
That's right, they didn't have jets. And but Jesse Duplantis says at one time that, if Jesus were here today, alive today, he wouldn't be on a donkey. Well, that's true. He might not be on a donkey. He might be on a horse. He might be in a Volvo. He might be walking on a bike. But the logical conclusion could not be, if Jesus were not on a donkey, he must be in a $54 million jet.
No.
I find unpersuasive.
If he were anything, I would think he would be riding on third class on a plane or second class or something to be
on
around
a regular plane, yeah.
Yeah, like a normal, not a private jet. It doesn't seem like... If that were the Jesus we had, then I don't think most of his teachings wouldn't apply to what he's doing. Most of his teachings wouldn't apply to his lifestyle.
Yeah, his own lifestyle. He'd be hypocritical.
Yeah.
Another reason why I would say it's difficult to be convinced that he heard from Jesus is $54 million toward a jet could go a far way doing a lot of good for other things of real needs. A real need is not having a layover, but maybe something more like every 2 seconds a baby is aborted around the world. Every 2 seconds a baby's killed. Or the people who are starving to death, or people who, on and on it goes, hurricane victims and whatever. That $54 million go, how many schools could be built? How many homeless shelters could be constructed? That's right.
Wells.
Clean water wells, people who drink and die and
medicine.
sick. That's right. It strikes me as a little more helpful than not having a layover, not to mention the other 3 jets he already has. Yeah,
of course.
So now you might say, well, David, then when is the line drawn? Well, can God ever call me to buy a house or a car or whatever? The answer is, I think he can. I think if those things are used strictly for ministry, not just for your own goods, but genuine ministry. But again, that's a heavy-duty prayerful thing to do, and I would never in a million years assume that Jesus said it. You'd have to be really convinced.
Pray and have a lot of peace about that.
It'd be a lot of... Now, he might have peace. Yeah, David have all that. He'd say, David and Hayden, God, I know what God said, and that's it. I don't know. It also is bothersome if you meet other Christians who just instinctively say, I think you misheard him. That's bothersome. But if you meet most Christians go, that sounds like something God would tell a person. And that's a little more fickle, I know that, but that's another thing that can help. Maybe the last thing that bothers me so much about this kind of what I would consider nonsense is that in this day and age, and it's almost all the time, but certainly this day and age where the atheism has really made a lot of headway in national publicity and marketing and so forth, this kind of stuff just screams out Christians are so greedy, materialistic, dumb, only care about themselves, selfish, and their followers are dumb sheep. And it's one of those things where, not that everyone needs to make their decisions for that reason, but the PR campaign, it's called public relations, that is your perception out there. This is one of the worst conceivable dumb things
you could say.
Could say. It's just one of the worst. This is one of those kind of things that my hope and prayer has been, when I first heard it, when I shook my head, I hoped that people who are atheists, I think I'm to Jesus, but I thought, well, they're going to say, see, I told you so. And that Christians, people who are already Christians, are going to go, yeah, that's not us. And the people in between are the ones I'm more concerned about. Mm-hmm. Like if the last straw. If I hear one more preacher talk about money.
And then,
yeah, this kind of junk. But hopefully it's just seen as a laughingstock. The idea, not him, but...
Mm-hmm. The idea that Jesus would have 50 million. And I think any reasonable person that's done at least a little reading into the Bible, knows enough about Christianity to know, or has read the Gospels, has enough understanding of this area to know that doesn't seem like something Jesus would say, and that doesn't just drive them away from Christianity as a whole and everything inside of it. I don't think that's going to happen. I think mostly it's just going to be used as, I guess, as a joke or a meme.
I sure hope so.
As like.
Well, I mean, I hope it's not a joke. You know what I'm saying?
Not him, but the idea that Jesus would be like, yeah, go ahead and buy that jet. But I hope that through this experience, people won't be turned away from Jesus and all of the good stuff, and hope they'll look in more to see if this is really, like, maybe this is. I don't know, maybe this is an entrance or something to a bunch of people being like, is this serious? Does Jesus really tell people this? And then they'll look into it, maybe out of greed, maybe out of curiosity, I don't know. But to just see, hey, he doesn't say this, but he does say a lot of other interesting things.
Oh, Jesus,
not
Jesse Duplantis.
Yeah, not Jesse Duplantis.
So hopefully I hope. Yeah. I suspect that his devout followers will send him checks and that eventually he will get this or get something close to it, and then the people who already believe in that theology go, "Yep, it worked. You just got to believe it." In other words, that's I have a suspicion it's just going to reinforce, and then everyone else should shake their heads and the nonsense. And there's a preacher who died not long ago. He's one of the most well-known evangelists ever. His name was Billy Graham. You remember seeing him ever on TV or anything?
I do.
People like Billy Graham were much more popular back at the turn of the century, and he was one of the last living legends, you might say.
Was that the 2000s?
Mm-hmm. No, the century. I mean, sorry. I forgot how young you are.
Pretty young.
Back in the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly, so the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was real popular in the U.S., particularly to have big revivals. They had big speakers, very well-known, not big as in physically, but metaphorically speaking, they were very famous, and they preached and taught all over the place. And before them, there were legacy people like John Wesley over in Europe, or,
lots of other people.
A lot of the people. When you have these massive people who are well known as being well-known preachers. Well, in the U.S., the distinction is by the late 19th and early 20th centuries. That's late 1800s, early 1900s. The distinction is by then they had big camp revival meetings in New York and other places, huge conferences, and they'd bring in these big names like celebrities. Well, Billy Graham was a young'un back then, and most everyone else, of course, well, they all died off. Billy Graham was the last kind of living connection to that. One thing Billy Graham did one of the things he didn't do that was so fascinating that kept him, and many people who know a lot more about his legacy than I do, but one thing is clear is what he didn't do is have these kind of nonsense scandals. It allowed him to stay out of the limelight. He focused on the right things, and when it came to money, he would come to these towns. They were called crusades, which now is so offensive and socially, now they would say the word. Back then they called them crusades, the big preaching things, which he did when he was a kid. Back that legacy I said that was connected. That's what they did forever in the U.S. Well, he did that too, and they were people massive. And I remember going to one or two
in Texas.
I think it might have been Texas.
Crazy, a big
you are crazy, but it might have been. I don't know.
Baseball stadium, probably baseball.
It might have been. I
remember seeing something on TV about him.
But anyway, I think maybe it was North Carolina back when I was before.
Well, I was
before you even thought of. It's hard to imagine the life before.
It is weird.
It's very weird. What was it like before then for you?
I think it was just nice not having to hear you. I'm joking. That's a joke. That's a joke. Don't send hate mail.
He shook his head. I'm kidding. That's a joke.
I can't. People are so sensitive today, but say anything.
Do you have any tissue? I'm getting kind of teary.
Okay. Well, I was gonna make a joke there, but I don't want to.
It's obvious that you're a racist.
Okay, I'll just leave then. Okay, bye.
It's obvious.
Bye.
Anyway, the end of my point was story. This is a phenomenal story. You're missing out. The ending is breathtaking.
I bet.
Catch your breath.
We'll have a Fortnite game to get back to.
A
so can
Fortnite.
we hurry this up? Yeah.
Oh man. Oh.
I got a video game to come back to.
Fortnite nonsense.
I gotta go.
Anyway, the point is, when he'd go to these crusades, he published. I remember this. He published in the newspaper all the money that was raised and where it went. Everything.
Ooh.
In the newspaper. So there was incessant transparency.
That's great.
He never did things with other females. He only traveled with men. He never had women like alone in a hotel. He was always with other guys. He wouldn't meet them alone all the time to be accountable. And this is the kind of stuff, he didn't ask for jets. If anybody ever, Billy Graham probably raised like $1 billion. People stinking loved him. If Billy Graham said, man, I've never asked for anything my entire life, but you know what, I'm 80 years old and I want to keep preaching the gospel, and there's certain machines on this private jet that I can have an auction machine. He'd raise so much money in a heartbeat because he actually does go and preach the gospel. Even he didn't do that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that kind of stuff. So anyway, my point is transparency. So when you grow up, when you go preach around the world.
Important.
Yeah. So the whole moral of the story is, son, don't ask for $54 million jets. Like $50 million maybe. 54 is just too much.
Okay, you think it's too small. I was thinking 60. I think that's
60?
That's a safe little great spot. Great
Jesus didn't tell you that. He told me to tell you that he didn't say that.
Yeah, God himself did. God the Father. With tissues, Dad.
All right, go brush your teeth. It's nighttime.
Okay, this has been Dr. David's Glimpse of the Kingdom. Thank you for listening in, and
they're not listening by now.
God bless.
Believe me, they're not listening.
God bless.
This attention span these days, it's already been 19 minutes. They tuned out about minute 12.
What are we talking about?
I think when you started talking, they just, next.
Drowse.
Click the next chapter. Pray for my son.
I need it.
I love you, son. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything you said.
I am attractive.
At least 10%. You were attractive?
Yes.
You were a lot like me.
Remember that.
At least 10% of what you said was true. I don't know which 10%, but...
I think it was 10.9.
Is that your mom calling? Yeah, it is.
What? There's no voice.
See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you'll listen more. If you want more, go to davidpendergrass.com. There are tabs at the top that let you have access to all the podcasts I've recorded, to sermons I've done, books I've written. They're all there at davidpendergrass.com. You can also check me out on Facebook, facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom. facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom. And also look at my Twitter feed at glimpse the kingdom or at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass. There's tons of ways to reach out. I hope you will. Send me your questions, send me your comments. If you'd like to support the ministries of Glimpse of the Kingdom, you can also find ways to give online on davidpendergrass.com. If you'd like for me to come and do some consulting, check out my website, davidpendergrassconsulting.com, and I'll be happy to come out and speak to your organization and help and train any way I can. God bless you. See you online.